Most mental health conditions have ups and downs to some degree. People with depression go through periods of time where they feel joy and excitement relatively easily. People with anxiety go through times when they feel calm and relaxed. People with PTSD have periods where triggers are few and far between and they feel pretty safe, just to name a few examples. It doesn't mean that you feel completely fine on the good days, or at least the air quotes, better days. This is all relative when we're talking about mental health, but you feel better than you normally feel. The clouds part at least a little bit, and you feel more human and more functional for a while. Unfortunately, for many of us, these breaks don't end up providing the relief that we hope for. One thing that is pretty consistent across nearly all mental health conditions, whether you have a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, ADHD, autism, PTSD, whatever, basically anything in the DSM, is a chronic sense of feeling behind in life. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because every mental health condition to some degree basically puts roadblocks in your life. It makes things harder. It makes things take more effort. It makes you not want to do things as much. It makes things take longer. It distracts you. It makes you so you can't sleep. All kinds of stuff happen when you're struggling with your mental health that change the course at which you're living your life and change your trajectory. And so those of us who have dealt with chronic mental health conditions often do the whole social comparison thing and look at people our age, and we tend to then look inward and say, I'm not really meeting the benchmarks. I'm not where most people my biological age are at socially or educationally or occupationally or with regards to independence or finances or whatever it is, because all of these elements of life are impacted by our mental health. And so because we constantly feel behind, and we feel like we have lost so much time already, we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be productive during the periods of time when we feel a little bit better. We do this because we aren't sure how long the break will last, and we feel like we have a lot of ground to cover because of this constant maladaptive social comparison that we're engaging in. So we tend to use these better times to work ourselves extremely hard. We feel this constant sense of urgency, and that we have to, quote, strike while the iron is hot because it won't stay hot for very long. This approach creates a couple of problems, at least in my experience. The first is that it becomes almost impossible, or sometimes literally impossible, to enjoy these periods of reduced symptoms because they instantly come with responsibility and obligation and expectation, even if only from ourselves. And sometimes it also comes from other people. We end up basically having two modes of functioning. We have the I am struggling and not getting much done mode. And then we have the I'm feeling a little bit better, which makes me able to do more. But then I am instantly stressed because I constantly feel like I'm not doing enough, and that my motivation, my energy, my whatever the energy source that I'm drawing from to get more done than I usually do is constantly on the verge of expiring. It feels a little bit like driving a car that's constantly on E. It's like, when am I going to run out of gas? Am I actually going to make it to where I'm going before I'm depleted? Neither of these modes are enjoyable. They are just two different types of pain. So you actually never get a break. The second problem with this approach is that smothering your occasionally brighter or lighter moods, or whatever we want to call them, tends to shorten them. So this idea that like these periods of time when I feel good or better tend to be really short and dramatically outnumbered by the periods of time where I don't feel really good and can't get much done, may accidentally, with all due respect, may be partially your fault. I'm not trying to be mean. You probably don't know. That's what this kind of content is for. Part of why these periods of life feel so rare and so preciously limited might be because you accidentally kill them with pressure. It's kind of like if you've ever started a campfire. It's a good metaphor. So you start a fire, and typically you just use kindling, right? Like little twigs, pine cones, pine needles, stuff like that, paper, because you need to start a fire with little stuff, because it doesn't get hot enough to just instantly ignite a log unless you dump a bunch of lighter fluid on it. So what you're doing to yourself in these situations, if you're living by this pattern I've described, is kind of like if you get this little fire going from like this little pile of sticks, and then you immediately like dump a bunch of logs on top of this little fire, and it smothers it. It crushes the flame, and nothing happens. It smothers it. I often think of my life as being somewhat like a budget. And this is a framework I use to get out of this constant, too unpleasant stages mode of life. Anything in my budget that drains my energy, I consider that like an expense. So things like work, chores at home, content creation. I love you guys, but this is work. These are expenses for me. They require me to take energy I have and then basically deploy it into something, and it's then depleted to some degree. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's an expense. Like having electricity in my home is not bad. I am very grateful that I have electricity, but it costs money. We have to be mindful of how many expenses we have in our lives. Anything that gives me energy in this system would be income, right? So that's the other side of your budget sheet. So that's things like, getting enough sleep, eating healthy, having good relationships with safe people, my hobbies, my spiritual practices. These are things that, fill my cup, so to speak. They provide me with energy. Now, sometimes the relationship with the things that give you energy is nonlinear, though. What I mean by that is, like, I'm a somewhat extroverted person, or I'm sorry, introverted. I'm not majorly introverted, but I do kind of drift towards that side of the introversion extroversion continuum. And so if I have too many social obligations, that actually becomes an expense. It actually becomes something that drains my energy. So balance is really important with some of these. It's not always just like more is better. I mean, sleep is the same way. If you get too much sleep, you actually end up being really tired the next day. So, but those are the things that give you the energy to take care of your expenses without experiencing what I call emotional poverty, which is when every day takes more out of you than your current habits and routines and lifestyle are able to replenish. And so when you're functioning in this deficit state, you will eventually become depleted, burnt out, and generally unable to function because you're at zero and you don't have a system set in place that is replenishing you with enough energy to actually do the things you need to do. So where this becomes a little bit more practical is that there's actually a third category of activities in this budget sheet. And that category is what I call investments. And this is a very literal metaphor. Investments are activities that in the present, when you do them, they are expenses. So they're things that, like, right that very second, immediately upon doing it, you will have less energy. Just as if you took money that was in your bank account and you put it in a 401k, you have less money in your bank account today. Your available funds have actually gone down as a result of an investment. But in the future, these investments become income, meaning there's something that takes a little bit of energy from you when you do it, but is going to pay you back, hopefully like with dividends or interest over time. That might sound a little confusing, so let me give you an example of what I mean. If I go for a run right after I finish recording this video, that will not immediately give me more energy. In fact, I will have less energy after going for the run than I would have before going for the run because I used energy to go on the run. But if I get in the habit of going on, a reasonably paced, reasonably distanced run every single day, or it doesn't even have to be every day, just consistently, let's say, my net available energy day to day will go up. Because moving your body and improving your physical health is one of the things that pays you back with interest. It takes energy when you do it, but it gives you back more than it takes over a longer time frame, just like an investment, just like a 401k, for example. So spending my energy on investments rather than expenses during the periods of time when my symptoms reduce and I feel a little bit better has been one of my most key strategies that I've used to make long-term improvements to my own mental health. And it really is like, I know I'm like pushing this metaphor really hard here, but it really is just like with money. So if you have a real, like a financial budget where you actually spend more than you make, you eventually deplete yourself with that. If you unexpectedly get some money that you didn't know you were going to get, a lot of people will just try to use that to get current on their bills. And that, makes you feel better for a while. But if you don't change anything about how much money you have coming in and how much money you have going out, all you've done is delay the inevitable. All you've done is like buy yourself a little extra time. You haven't actually changed the dynamics of this system that is depleting you. And so all you're doing is just getting these little breaks here and there. Nothing's actually getting fixed or changed. Put another way, what I want you to think about doing is instead of spending your energy on the world and the things it demands from you or that you think it demands from you, I want you to consider spending it on you when you have it. And I personally hate it when people give vague, abstract advice. So I'm going to spell out for you exactly what some of the things I invest in when I'm feeling better have been that have helped me get out of this hole, get out of this emotional poverty state. One of them is healthy relationships. I kind of alluded to what most of these are already, but I'm just going to flesh these out a little bit more in detail. Having connections to people in this world that you care about and that you value is one of the most uplifting things that you can ever have. It is one of the most consistent sources of, income in this system that you can find. There's nothing quite like feeling connected to other people out there. And people like you and me who don't feel that easily, we don't take it for granted. And we don't necessarily need, this massive social group of like 30 people. One or two might be all we need. Healthy relationships, though, is a tricky thing to define because even wonderful people, even safe people, even people who get it, we form bad habits with one another over time, whether that's just like not talking about things that bother us or just getting in some dynamics where like one person does too much in one area and another person does too much in another area. Maybe one person always instigates every conversation, good or bad, or always is the one that has to make plans. When you are feeling a little bit better, that can be a great time to work on your relationships, try to improve the health of your relationships. Because that's the kind of thing when you are really struggling, when you are really suffering, you tend to look at and you're like, I know this could be better. I know my relationship with, whoever it is, my parents, my kids, my partner, my friends, my coworkers, I see room for improvement and I would really like to see that improvement, but I'm just so exhausted. I can't even put the effort in. That is a very, very strong investment because some of those relationships might be ones that you have for the rest of your life. And a relationship that you will have from today until the day when one of you dies will impact your life every day to some degree. Even if you don't interact with that person every day, you will probably think about them at least once per day, every day for the rest of your life. And the emotions that you experience when you think about that person will be at least in part a response to the quality and to the health of that relationship. And so for that reason, working on things like boundaries, assertiveness, communication styles, bad habits, all the stuff that's bugging you, that you see it and you make a little mental note of it and you're like, I do not have it in me to even approach that today, let alone tackle it. I know that when you're feeling better, the last thing you probably want to do is have a difficult conversation with somebody, but it can be so very worth it. Another thing that I think is almost always worth working on when you're feeling a little bit better is your sleep hygiene. That's another one of those things, especially if you're struggling with hypersomnia, where you're oversleeping, that it tends to get worse before it gets better. Whether you're practicing sleep restriction therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, most things that are going to help you sleep better usually start, this sucks, but it's true, they usually start with a period of time when you sleep less because we have to essentially reset your system, right? And again, you don't have the budget for less sleep when you are already at your floor, when you're like, I cannot afford to feel any worse, or I'm not sure I can do even the most basic of obligations that I know I need to be able to go out there and do. So when you're feeling a little bit better, that is a fantastic time to really take your sleep hygiene seriously. Another thing worth working on is spending a reasonable amount of time on hobbies. This is one of those non-linear things because when we're struggling with our hobbies, it tends to go to one of two extremes. We either kind of just bail on everything and say, screw it, I'm not feeling good about anything anyway, so I'm just going to stop doing all these things that I care about or that I normally feel good when I'm doing. Or we go the other way, and that's all we do, or at least all we want to do, and we become, and I'm not saying this judgmentally, this has happened to me more times than I can count, but we get very overindulgent in our hobbies because we are desperately seeking something that makes us feel even a little bit better, and things that produce large amounts of joy with low amounts of effort or responsibility seem on the surface like something that would fit really well in that equation. So regardless of which direction you have gone in, we want to kind of rein that in towards the middle. It is very, very difficult. I've tried both extremes, not necessarily on purpose. I've experimented with them, let's say. It's very difficult to feel good about life in a long-term sustainable way when you don't do anything just because it feels good. When every second of every day is work and obligation and responsibility. I do think there are a small handful of people that can thrive under those conditions. And I think many of those people probably are neurodivergent in some way. Most of us don't operate that way. And if we try to force ourselves to operate that way, it just kind of drives us further and further down. But if you tend more towards that overindulgent route, what you really end up having then is opportunity cost. You're spending so much time on these hobbies that you're maybe missing out on relationships, missing out on sleep hygiene, missing out on the things that ultimately, although they don't feel as good when you do them, are going to pay you back again and again and again, and ultimately are more likely to get you out of this emotional poverty state. So whichever extreme you go to, try to kind of bring it in towards the middle. Fourth thing that I think is almost always worth working on when you have these little breaks in the darkness is nutrition. And that could also include cooking. Doesn't have to, but it could. Again, this is similar to hobbies. We usually go to one extreme or the other when we're struggling emotionally. We either kind of lose interest in food and not necessarily on purpose, but we become very restrictive of food intake. Our bodies and brains don't have enough food to work, or we overindulge in food, and that's not harmless either. When you are overeating or even binge eating potentially, it takes a lot of energy. This goes back to the budget. Your metabolic system literally has to use more energy to break down this like kind of excessive amount of food. Again, I'm not trying to be mean. I've done this. It's just, this is a thing that happens. It takes a lot of effort for your body to break down food, especially if it's like twice as much as you actually needed nutritionally. And you end up feeling groggy, fatigued, maybe even disoriented to some degree. I mean, think of like the stereotypical, like what does an American home look like after Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's like a bunch of dudes lying around on the couch going, oh, I ate too much. I don't want to do anything now. That's what happens to us when we do that. Like, that's not just a stupid cultural stereotype. That's actually what happens for a physiological reason. So whichever extreme you drift towards when you're struggling, again, we want to bring it back towards the middle. If you struggle with not eating enough and you struggle with restriction, you can work on eating by a clock, setting timers on your phone, because you likely kind of lose touch with hunger cues and like you don't even feel hungry, you don't even want to consume food. Otherwise, we maybe, if you struggle with overeating, maybe we need a plan for eating. Maybe we need to pre-proportion meals, do some meal prep. Make sure you know what you're eating before, because you know that you're in an emotional state where you're not likely to make decisions that are in your own best interest or in alignment with your values when you're presented with like an unlimited amount of food, for example. Fifth thing that I encourage you guys to consider during these lighter periods is learning a new skill or just improving a skill that you have. Something that I don't see talked about very often in the context of mental health or therapy is the importance of competence. And I'm surprised this doesn't get talked about more, because a lot of mental health conditions, especially depression and PTSD, anxiety to some degree as well, they really erode your self-confidence. And that can become such a downward spiral, because if you don't feel like you're good at anything, you don't really want to do anything. It isn't fun to do stuff you're not good at. Most people feel that way. So if you think you're not good at anything, or you stopped doing things that you wanted to be good at or that mattered to you because you didn't feel good enough to do them, your skill level probably does decline to some degree. But what I think is even more dangerous is that your perception of your skill level declines. When we haven't done something in a while, we tend to think like, oh, I probably suck at that thing now, even if you really realistically have actually retained most of your skill from it. So getting back into things that give you a sense of competence in this world, that give you this feeling of like, I can go out there and I can do things and I can take chances and I can take risks. And if I find myself in a situation that I didn't predict, or a situation that involves challenges, that I generally believe that I have the skills and the ability to navigate that. That is why, or lack of that, I should say, is why I hardly ever left the house for almost a decade, because I could not stop thinking about all the things that might happen and all the situations I might face that I wouldn't know how to handle, that I didn't have the skills for. And I truly was lacking life skills because I didn't do anything. It's a vicious cycle. You avoid the things that make you uncomfortable. You become more uncomfortable in those situations because you see the gap between you and other people getting wider and wider and wider because they're doing those things and you're not. So this is the time to really pick up, like, whatever you're most insecure about. I would say, what is the thing that bothers you the most that, like, oh, I hope no one realizes how bad I am at this? Like, for me, for a long time, it was like handyman stuff, because I am somewhat of an outdoorsman. Like, I have some skills that, because I have these skills, like I know how to hunt and fish. And people assume that, like, if you know how to hunt and fish, you also know how to, like, fix things. And a lot of the time that is true, because you spend a lot of time in outdoors and with machinery and guns and whatnot. Like, things break and you have to fix them. Except for whatever reason, I managed to go most of my life without ever developing any fix-it skills. So I had this set of skills that would make people think, oh, I bet he can, like, change a tire. For a long time in my life, no, I could not. Or, like, repair this basic thing in my house that broke. No, couldn't do it. And was horribly insecure about that. Not just because of societal pressure, but because, like, I actually do want to be a kind of person who can, like, fix basic things when they break. For most of my life, I haven't been. And so I would avoid any situation that involved, like, manual labor or using a skill, because I didn't want people to see how terrible I was at everything. I was so embarrassed about it. I was so self-conscious about it. Learning skills is a great use of that occasional extra energy that you might get. My sixth and last one for you, and it's going to kind of be on a similar theme to some of the other ones we've talked about, but it's working on my physical health. And there's a couple, sleeping and eating certainly are part of that, which we've already discussed. Two other things I want to emphasize here. One is establishing a workout routine. It is like, you could make a very strong case that regular physical activity is the single most important thing a person with mental illness can do. It is physical activity, being it, is essentially transdiagnostic, meaning pretty much doesn't matter what mental health condition or conditions you have, this will help you. There's not a lot of things we can say that about. A lot of things it's like, exposure therapy, that'll help you for this, but not necessarily for this. Or this medication will help if you have this, but if you've been misdiagnosed and you don't have this medication is going to do nothing or possibly make you worse and want to kill yourself. Physical activity pretty much helps with everything. And it helps to a degree that is comparable to, like, the best therapists in the world, the best medications in the world. This is no joke. This stuff has been established. But of course, it is a very, very difficult thing to get going on, even under ideal circumstances. And when you, again, you're at the bottom of the barrel in life, motivation's low, self-esteem is low, energy's low, appetite's low, those are certainly not the ideal conditions under which to start a workout program. So when you have that little bit of surplus, that little bit of, like, hey, it's 5 p.m. and I don't actually feel like I need to crawl back into bed or lay down on the couch and just be done with my entire day, investing that little bit of surplus in starting to develop a physical activity routine, unbelievably valuable use of those resources. Having more energy, fewer illnesses, fewer injuries, and ultimately a better functioning brain essentially will raise both your floor and your ceiling for how good or bad you're capable of feeling every day of your life. The second part is, once you get past the basics of physical health that we've already discussed, making proactive, and when I say get past, I don't mean that you're going to perfect it. No one ever perfects it. But when you're like, I'm sleeping, eating, and moving my body, okay, I'm doing about as well as most people do, and I'm still not feeling the way I want to feel. That's when we start to get into the territory of making proactive rather than reactive health changes. And making proactive health changes tends to be a little bit more individualized and potentially a little bit more complex than what we have previously discussed. It can be very tough to know where to go and what to work on. And that's where today's sponsor, Function Health, comes into play. Function Health provides easy to understand, actionable guidance on how you can improve your overall health by the results of a simple blood work panel. The results of this panel are completely customized to your unique health status and biomarkers, and they can help you identify additional lifestyle changes that you as a unique individual will find value in if you want to just feel your best, which we all do. They were also kind enough to offer a $100 credit to the first 1,000 people who sign up using the link in the description of today's video or by scanning the QR code on the screen. If you want personalized suggestions on how to feel and function better, I highly recommend checking them out. Before I get going, I hope this made sense, first of all. I know that this idea of your life being like a balance sheet, it's probably a little bit of a different way of looking at it. I like to find, this is kind of just how my brain works. I like to find concrete things that I already understand and then use them as a framework for mental health, which I actually, even though it's literally my job, still often find like ambiguous and vague and difficult to understand. But if I can say, well, this is like this and I understand this, now I can just graft this framework I already have into this thing I'm trying to do. And it gives me a much clearer sense of where to go and what to do. So I'm guessing, unless this is the first video of mine you've ever watched, you probably kind of know how my brain works by now. And if yours didn't work at least a little bit like mine, you probably wouldn't care to watch it. So I'm hoping and maybe assuming to some degree that you also found value in this. Having a little trouble with my words today. My dog woke me up at about 1:30 p.m. I was going to say last night, but I guess technically this morning, by making this weird howling noise that I thought was an air raid siren. So I thought we were like in danger, but it was just him having a bad dream. So if I've been stumbling over my words a lot today, that's why. Before I go, I also got to point out one last thing. Got another new shirt. Some of you guys made fun of me for the fact that I appeared to only have like 3 shirts. I actually had like 12, but they were just like, multiple of the same shirt. Decided it's time to add a little visual flair to this channel. So hope you enjoy the added visual flair. If you're just listening to the podcast, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Don't worry about it. As always, take care, and I will see you next time.